Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Parent Teacher Association, former pupils and friends, the reason for my presence here, believe me, is not of my pity. I'd rather be like the infant newly come to Whithorn School. Now, this is quite true. And when asked how he liked the first day, they have said, "Oh, I wish to God I'd never started with you." So like him, in one way, I wish I never agreed to be a name and handle in giving you "this is my life" in teaching. And there's another instance comes to my mind. This child, he's still in school, I tell you. At the end of the first day, the next morning, his mother went to wake him up and said, "Now come on, sit up and get ready to go to school." And he says, "Nah, Jean." He says, "I went yesterday. Somebody else told me to go today." Well, probably from time to time, every teacher pauses and asks why he or she entered the profession. Most of these thousands have entered teaching because the course of their careers of study and economic circumstances have led them step by step in this direction. When I entered teaching, well, you know how many years ago, this was the profession which a pupil of aptitude, but without financial resources, could most easily enter. Mark though, there were no grants. Everything had to come out of the common purse at home. Sacrifices had to be made. That's one of the reasons why today I can't abide to see any wastery of school books, school material, or anything at all. If so, they're fined. That's one of the reasons if they waste anything. The school fund benefits. Although I'm only a half Highlander, my maternal parent was Highland, and well, you know the hopes of Highlander and Islander as regards the profession. They always like to have one, either in the ministry or the teaching or something like that. To quote a very recent speech given at Congress at Christmas time, I entered what was there termed as the grandest thing in the world. That expression comes from C.M. Barry's Mary Rose. And so with these preliminaries, as to the why and wherefore I became a teacher, here goes. I had already been appointed to a post in Haddington when my former headmaster, the late Mr. James Smith, came asking me, firstly, to consider going to the Isle of Whithorn to help in a difficult situation there. The headmaster there had left for another appointment, and a lady assistant was left in charge of the whole school. Unless help was forthcoming, she threatened to resign. And secondly, to encourage me probably to accept. There was a post becoming vacant in Whithorn, and he was anxious I should eventually come to Whithorn. You see, as a student teacher, I had done a week's teaching to allow Mr. Barr to go off and be married. So there it is. I agreed to the Isle proposition, and down to the Isle I cycled. No other transport was available, save that of Alec Reed's wagonette. Do you remember it? Which plied back and forth to and from all trains coming into Whithorn. Indeed, many a night after school closure, the weather was often very bad, and I had to use Alec's transport, leaving the bike behind. Following a very bad night came a lovely sunny morning, and many a walk I had on the high road to be in the Isle at 9:30 in the morning. Often did I meet the late Mr. Drake en route for Whithorn in his red car. He lived then in Knockenhall. Never shall I ever forget my first day at school in the Isle. There was no mistaking where the school was, for even on the seafront, signs of activity were very much in evidence. It was pandemonium. No amount of knocking could gain me admittance, so I duly admitted myself. Miss Carmichael's words were, "Thank goodness, someone has come, for I'm ready to give up." And so began the weeks of settling in and settling down of the more unruly members. To fortify myself and make my presence felt, less than a Lochgelly had to be me. For those not familiar with the term Lochgelly, it is an S-T-R-E-T. Mine was a Whithorn vintage, made by the late Mr. Bendel, saddler to the late Mr. Drake. It's still to the fore, but it never ruled me, I ruled it. Two of the Isle pupils stand out in my memory, a boy and a girl. I'm not mentioning any names. The latter had to come from the country and would come wandering in any old time after 10 o'clock. Well, in later years, when I did go her way, I realized the distance she had to come, and perhaps she deserved my sympathy more than my reprimands. Well, the boy was a real deal. Oh, I had quite a few of them in my day. Very mischievous, but something very likable about him, too. Yes, when we do meet, he goes back over the old times to the Isles School. Well, I was in the Isles and the weather was really at its worst, and so outdoor activities were out of question. The day was fully occupied, drilling in the 3 hours, several classes to teach. When Miss Carmichael had the infant and lower juniors, I took the top juniors and seniors. Then there came the transfer to Whithorn. The class I took then was known as Junior 2, later on Primary 1, and finally Primary 3. In those days, both infant teachers taught in the one room, in what is Mrs. Little's room today. 2 teachers, while I was next door through the partition, so you can imagine the carry-on, not the carry-on, but the bustle that was going on between the 2 rooms. The then infant mistress had just come back from the army in Germany, having been on educational work there following the 1918 war. On duty, sometimes she came in her military uniform, so we had a bit of militarism for a time. Later on, she entered hospital for an operation. And on her return, she practiced raising her arm. I don't mean to use the strap or anything else, but to see how far up she could reach every day, and I think the infant room test bears the marks to this day. Well, as time went on, staff relations were not too amiable, and she retired. A new appointment was made, but sharing the one room still existed. Classes were quite large. I can remember at one point in my class I had 45 children. I don't know if that is the year you were there or not. It was a full day indeed, dealing with such numbers. There was still the extraneous work on Monday mornings, savings in the form of penny stamps being put on a folder containing 4 shillings worth. When filled, this was taken to the post office and entered into the folder savings book, or most likely it was cashed and all the system began again. However, life was not all humdrum. There were the lighter moments too. For example, one morning we must have had combined assembly with the infants for prayer and hymn singing. The hymn was in progress when a latecomer came in. Everybody gasped. But he arrived, garbed in a most peculiar way. His trousers were back to front, and the chef's tail sticking out behind. All he could say was, "My mother bless him." And no doubt he had to bless himself. Needless to say, that interlude put paid to the Bible lesson for the time being. However, I do wish I had made a note of experiences and sayings of those earlier days. I would not be at a loss for tonight's subject, but time has erased their memory. So, attend you younger ones when you come to turn the pages backwards, that you have something to go upon. Well, I had 2 classes for RI, religious instruction, my own and Junior 1. The teacher of Junior 1 had to take higher grade needlework and dressmaking. So I would have from 70 to 80 pupils every morning till 10 o'clock. There we were herded together in serried ranks in a galleried room. Now, mostly all the rooms in the primary school were galleries, with dual desks which could be turned up when not required for writing. Just imagine the noise when they had to be put down for written work. They took a delight in making as much row as they could. Narrow passages, if you wanted to get somebody in the top row and you flew up and down the passage, you suffered with black and blue sides as a result. Well, having this other class in the morning for Bible presented a little snag. One of the pupils was my own brother. You know, it's very difficult having a relation in the class because he's often, or she, is often dealt with more severely than others. His objections to me were not voiced in school, but at home. He objected to me never addressing him by his name, but just you. Secondly, he was never given the privilege of giving the absentee names. The day he couldn't say his catechism was a real humiliation, when he had to take his punishment with the rest, but mine awaited me when I went home. I wondered at the front door not opening very well. There he was behind the door, to equalize what he thought was an injustice. At the end of the day, I also had two classes, girls, so my own class and the next class for needlework. But the school conditions in those days, we had no school janitor, two lady cleaners, Miss Mary Ann Thompson and her daughter Isabella. Rooms for many, many years were heated by huge fireplaces, which were well and truly guarded. Some were so large, much coal was consumed therein. These fires had to be very low by 4 p.m. to enable the cleaners to have them raked out and prepared for the morrow. Indeed, often a reset fire would catch again. Later on in wartime, this presented a great hazard, as we had no blackouts for the windows, only paper crisscross strips against bomb blasts, because an airplane had come over and landed a bomb on us and had it. Talking about guards, they served a dual purpose, one being a safety measure. On wet days, country children's coats hung round about, drying them off. Odors that emanated from them were not just of the 4-7 variety either. Shoes and socks adorned the hearthstones, and an ever-watchful eye had to see that they didn't catch fire. So you see, in wet days, the schoolroom was something like a laundry. Now, toilets were outside, dry. No facilities were there for the staff in the primary department. There was a small hand basin in each cloakroom, boys and girls, one towel provided in each to be serviced for a week. Even at the end of a forenoon session, you can imagine how it looked. That brings to mind one incident. I think we were to do some rather special work, and I had told them to come with clean hands, and I examined them and found that the boys had not done what they were told, so they were sent to the coach to wash their hands. It was a long time in coming back, and I thought I'd go and see what was keeping them. There was a line, and up and down the line was one going, he had a wee stick in his hand, and he's saying it to everyone, "Quacky, quacky, when you go in." And I don't know whether it's here or not, but Ian Drape tried to catch their eye. He couldn't do a thing about it. He couldn't warn his friend. And I just stood there and I said, "Yes, quacky, quacky, when you come in." Quacky, quacky, they go. Well, in the classroom, the curriculum was daily and duly carried out from 9:30 to 4. No specialist teachers, no free period. When weather was favourable, all PE, or drill as it was then called, took place in the playground. Not like what it is today. It was more like a battlefield. Well can I remember one occasion when it was my class's turn to be inspected. Oh, it was a bitter cold day in October, when out we trooped. And HMI was a lady, the more deadly of the species, we always thought. So she hung around and shivered. I was fine, for I exercised too as I took the lesson. And soon she too was obliged to take part in exercises in order to warm up. I was brought up in a hard school because when I was a pupil at school, we had an army sergeant for our drill instructor. And woe betide you if you turned right when he bellowed out left. Maybe that's why one of the present staff has called me a drum major today. Indeed, if you know your DBS, you know what name he gave me. I'm not telling you what it is. Pick it out. We have to go back to RI. The day began and still does with in the RI. Before the end of the session, we had inspection by the 2 local ministers. The syllabus consisted of rings of repetition, passages from Scripture, commandments, catechisms. Oh, the catechisms are still some in the classroom yet, in the press. They cost a halfpenny then. Oh, there were many heart-burnings that day, just as exciting as an inspector's visit. It was equally as nerve-wracking, too. The Roman Catholic children were present, and although they weren't examined, they often put up their hands to answer and could answer better sometimes than the Protestants. Well, religious instruction examinations are with us no more. The minister now is the instructor in the higher grade classes, and the priest in the primary, and we in turn attend our churches for end-of-term service. Well, after morning session came lunch hour. No dinner tickets to be distributed, as they are today, free or otherwise, for country children. An open shed was their retreat. Their feast, their feast. That's what they called it, their feast. Indeed, it was cold comfort. Then as winter came on, the school cleaner, with Miss Morton at the helm, thought of the scheme of having a hot plate of soup for the country children. This they could have for a halfpenny per plate. Farmers were very good in supplying rabbits and vegetables for the pot, and this was the first form of school dinner, and a real boon it was to them. The soup was made in a set pot, which was now a little shed-like thing attached to the shed where the boys, outer shed where the boys sheltered in the rain, out of the rain. Well, later on in 1933, there was a cocoa service started for a short time. You see, many country children walked miles to school over the fields as far away as Cairns, with difficult burdens to cross in the rain. So now you remember the socks round the fire. You understand why they were always dry. Shanks' Mere had to serve these children, not the comfortable form of transport of flesh and being wood. Never did I hear then the word thrombosis, one hears today. Lack of exercise contributes largely to that, you say. Nowadays, children are lifted and laid down safely to destination. Perhaps a good thing, too, for at least transport ensures their presence in school. With regard to the welfare, we had the services of the district nurse, and she did her work with a vengeance. She was a Highlander, and my word, she didn't have to do her work well. Nurse Robertson. Dr. Ross was the MOH over a very long period. Following on, we've had dental service and regular visitations from the health visitor. So right from the beginning to present day need, children are well catered for indeed, all through their school life. At the end of the course, there is guidance in the choice of careers for those who are leaving school. Now to go back to the 20s, an inspector Major Home decided printing should be used, and for many years this writing system was carried out. Cursive writing was not only introduced in the senior division in 1924. Schools growth on occasions, such as ordinations and inductions of ministers. Example, we went to Mr. Ewing's and Mr. Morrison's. In the early 20s, inspectors were very much in evidence, examining and reporting, and others besides came. My first experience as an inspector was we had lots of visitors coming to the school, and this particular day the door opened and in came what I thought was another visitor. He looked more like a farmer, plus fours, was dressed in great big boots, and it was only when he came up to my desk and said, "Can I see your record of work?" did I realize this was the chief himself. However, that was just shortly after Mr. Reed, the minister, came, so we had lots of visitors immediately. Another inspector of music, Dr. Somerville, recommended the necessity of having a piano for the efficient teaching of music in the higher grade department. A digression here. Mr. Barr then was our conductor, and at the end of the session we had a choral concert, and the proceeds from choral concerts bought us our choral piano, which was for many years in school, used by school, now it is in the church hall. We also had the visiting members of the SNC, School Management Committee, constantly coming to examine registers, count the number in the class, and put the names in the register, and make comments. Then the inspectors approved of abolishing the supplementary course of study. That meant that all qualifying pupils had to be moved up into a higher grade department, with special provision being made for pupils eminently unfit for a language other than English. This meant rearranging the timetable with two objects in view. First, more time for supervision by the headmaster, and secondly, more time for Mr. Barr to devote his time to higher grade work, who had been doing supplementary work. And every week, our headmaster, Mr. James Smith, was round seeing every class examining those who had kept well at it. The next year, 22 musical festivals were now got in the way. Mr. Barr took junior choirs. I had girl guide choirs and Meeting Stewart. There was an incident there with one of the festival committee, Miss Duncan. She complained about Whithorn being entered in the rural section. That was because Whithorn was doing rather well, and she was in a rural section herself, and she just didn't like it. So we had to climb down in order to appease her. So for a time, choirs went every year. Then it was known as the Galloway Musical Festival, and choirs came from Castle Douglas, Clonsnikel, Dunrye, Kirkcudbright, and Blah. Competition was really very keen, and among our earliest adjudicators was Sir Adrian Bose. Changes in school staff took place, and infant teacher led. The Director of Education was Colonel Johnston. and he made a new appointment. School reports continued to be at a very high standard. There was evidence that both staff and pupils were animated by the same spirit of plodding and sustained effort. Don't hear the feet squeaking yet. Then epidemics struck the school in 1926, when measles and scarlet fever caused the school to be closed. 1927 brought more change, and Mr. Barr was appointed as headmaster in Birmingham. At my stage, changes also were taking place. Each infant teacher now had a separate room, and I, with my class, became a floating commodity. And during the months that followed, I occupied at some time or other every room in the primary school. I even invaded a higher grade, too. For one day in the week, I occupied the cookery room, not the modern cookery room it is today. Alterations had not, as then, taken place. Every week, dual desks were screwed down and unscrewed at the end of the day. The floor still bears the scars. Yes, I saw them just the other day. On a Wednesday, I occupied the headmaster's room. This was only to be a temporary readjustment for that session, only in the hope that the high water mark for entrance had been reached. The primary roll was 224 and the higher grade 65. In 1928, Mr. Smith left to become the rector of the Douglas Youth High School, and Mr. Reverend arrived. Still the burning question was the overcrowding in the infant room, and another room was necessary. The high average of the qualifying pupils was thought to be caused by the large proportion of entrants in the infant room well over 5.5 years, in the years 1923-24, and they insisted that children should come to school at 5. In the summer of 28, a school sports afternoon was inaugurated very successfully. I can recall it was a lovely day, and some of us decided to have a tuck stall selling Boston cream. So all hands were on deck collecting containers from the science room and setting to make the Boston cream. A colleague in the weekend just remembered that she put the wrong ingredients in and wasted quite a bit. We did a roaring trade. Then following, we had the end of term 5 drilling, which took place in the parish church hall. There was also a show of work in the school on view to the public. The new session began with a report that the school tradition was being maintained. Still the talks went on about extra accommodations required. Overcrowding there was in the infant room, while at the other end of the scale, the post-primary accommodation was not only ample, but almost lavish. Changes, too, there were with the cleaners and the janitors. But changes are seen, too, not only with them, but with headmasters. 8 in all, up to date. But like the babbling brook, I've carried on. I think I only can think of 3 cleaners or janitors I know of alive. Mr. James Huxtable, Mr. Curry, who left Whithorn and became a janitor in the art school in Glasgow, and a freshman James. Discussions went on, about the new buildings, and by this time the roll was 299. Epidemics, measles, chickenpox, and influenza meant school closures. At the annual school sports in 1932, the gate money, £8, was donated to the Garrick Hospital Extension Scheme. The session ended with the usual prize giving, which took place in the town hall, at which Mr. McPhee presided. At this point, may I say that I know, at least from 1916, perhaps earlier, the Duck's Medal has been presented by a member of the McPhee family until the present day. 1932 marked the commemoration ceremony of the 15th centenary of St. Ninian. We had no school holiday, but I was able to be there because it was at the lunch hour at the vault. Again, it was a beautiful day. Church dignitaries of various denominations, some from quite a distance, were present. More discussion, but building was now underway, including an extension to the cookery room. The water system supplying the school was pumped by a windmill just over there, it was. And the gas supply was the second variety from the gas works in King's Road, now no longer existing. Added to our school duties, we teachers in the primary department had now to administer cod liver oil to certain necessitous children. For this they supplied their own spoons. The money for this project came from the school fund. In 1933, we now had a new executive officer, Mr. Stuart McIntosh, now Dr. McIntosh. This year also saw Mr. McKechnie, not this Mr. McKechnie, maybe a relation, I don't know, Secretary for Scottish Education. He came to see the building plan and to arrange a new outline for 3-year courses with a practical basis instead of a language basis. This year also saw us go to the town hall for physical education. Mr. Irvin, the headmaster, introduced the house system as we know it today. In the higher grade, there were 3 societies formed. One, the Woodland Rovers, the Insect Hunters, whether they're for fleas or what, I don't know, and the Camera Club. The object was to find something interesting for the children in their leisure hours in the hope that when they left school, they might become good biologists and photographers. Debating societies also were formed. Now, the school magazine was launched for the first time and met with a great success. This year, Mr. Irvin left, and Mr. Brown was appointed. The new curriculum was to be introduced as soon as the buildings were ready, which would include French, an alternative in the form of domestic science, 3 years or 2 years for girls, agriculture and bench work, 3 years and 2 years for boys. As Mr. Irvin was promoted to outwit the county, he was sorry he was not able to see this most desirable change in the curriculum. Here is a quote. As Newton Stewart is so far away, he thinks local secondary pupils should remain for 3 years in Whithorn, and that advanced division 3 years can quite well be carried on concurrently with a secondary course, with the addition of a visiting agricultural teacher for a day, we can remember him coming in his motorbike, and a visiting domestic science teacher 2 days. The following year, 34, it was decided that the then second year should continue with Latin until June 1935, when the teaching of Latin should cease. On the 29th of March 1934 was indeed a red letter day, so Mr. McKechnie came and opened the new building before a large and representative company gathered thus, showing the interest which the local people take in the education of their children. Present were the members of the Westminster Education Committee, members of SMC, staff and children. Mr. McPhee presided in the course of his remarks mentioned that Whithorn School would be the first in the county to offer a special course to pupils leaving school 14 or 15. Mr. McKechnie, on being introduced, said he loved opening schools, though he had never opened one in Wigtonshire. The reason being they had no new schools to open. He said he was glad that the addition was not just another patch, for there cometh a time when patching availeth not. He hoped the school would become the home of happy activity. The company adjourned to the corridor, and Mr. McKechnie, on the invitation of one of the senior pupils, cut the ribbon and opened the swing doors leading into the new building. That is over there. 33 years ago. This year we had a holiday for the royal wedding, the Duke of Kent's royal wedding. Then we had a visit from the BBC. A representative came and gave us a demonstration of broadcast teaching. Now, I've referred to the school magazine. Here is an article which might interest someone here in particular. I'll just read it to you. It's termed Orthography. It was simply awful. I have never had such a hard time in all my life. First, I got angina pectoris, followed by arteriosclerosis. I was just through these when I got tuberculosis, pneumonia, and typhus. Then they gave me hypodermics. Appendicitis was followed by tonsillectomy. I really don't know how I pulled through. It was the hardest spelling test ever I had. The next year, this same said gentleman was the editor of the 1936 magazine. And I think from the archives, I'll just read this a little bit about that too. There's another one. It's called Your Last School Day. That was mine on Friday. Should all acquaintance be forgot with your school teacher's cane? Before you leave the good old school, you must go back again and beg him hard for old time's sake, with long and fervent prayer to bend you o'er in solemn state and wax you then and there. So, when your age is ripe and old, and years have rolled away, your boast may be that you have caned at school on your last day. Well, In 1936, we had an exchange teacher from Canada under the League of Empire. Incidentally, I hope to spend a few days with the same lady in Brandon in July. I think I may safely say it was Mr. McIntosh who pioneered the scheme of the school trip. Indeed, this and all subsequent trips had an ulterior motive, that of being educated. This year, 1936, for most of Worcestershire schools, a trip to Rothsay was arranged. We entrained at Whithorn to join up at Newton Stewart and Dunraggett the long line of dining cars en route for Glasgow Central. From there, with police escort, we marched to the Broomielaw to board the King Edward for Dunoon and Rothsay. So we went sailing down the Clyde past the shipyard. At Rothsay, we only had half an hour ashore. And from there, we crossed by paddle steamer, Kylemore, who spent it mostly on the water thing, and journeying Kylemore to Largs. Our evening meal was served on the train. Thus ended one of the long excursions. On another occasion, there was also a trip to Edinburgh. You remember that? In 1937, there was an epidemic of flu, which caused the absences of 127 children. But later on in the year, spirits rose, for in March it was announced that there would be a children's matinee by the Bertha Wardle Company, Children's Theatre. It was unforgettable to watch the children's expression, especially when Bertha Wardle announced items, numbers, head out to the captains. This was a wonderful year also. It was coronation year of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. Every child was presented with a mug by Provost McPhee. About 250 children were entertained, given light refreshment, followed by a film in the local picture house by Mr. Henry, and it was a wooden erection, the picture house, down the Rennell there in Hughes Field. Entertainment was not yet over, for 6 days later all children of 8 years and over were conveyed in 5 buses to Stranraer to a show in the Regal Picture House, and our host and hostess, Lord and Lady Stair. With all these festivities, bear in mind the daily grind was still being done. It wasn't all just jaunting about. These were just pleasant interludes. All work and no play, you know. Well, in 1938, through prolonged absences in the infant room, extra work had to be coped with by the remaining staff, with no relief teachers applied. Later on, further absences extended into weeks. In the summer term of 1938, we had the opportunity of another outing, namely to the Empire Exhibition in Glasgow. Our journey was, of course, by train. Trips, as I've said already, were for all of educational value. This was to last for a long time. And I can remember that when we gathered on the platform 1 coming home at St. Enoch Station, one of the party got lost. And he spotted us 2 or 3 platforms away. And what do you think he was going to do? Jump down as if he were crossing from the creamery at Sorby over to the main platform. Oh, we really had our hats in our mouths that night. However, all went well. Well then came the war years, 39 to 45. Trains brought in the evacuees from Glasgow. From 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. the town hall was a seething mass trying to sort out children into the various homes. In the course of time, they were absorbed into the schools. These children came chiefly from Wolseley and St. Bonaventure schools. There were many private evacuees as well. The parents were connected with the district. School closed at 3:35 to enable them to reach home before dark and the cleaners to do their work. There was no form of lighting in the schools, not even paraffin lamps. I've already mentioned we had no blackouts whatsoever. Gas masks were carried religiously every day, so part of our equipment. In my class in the war years, we knitted squares to make woolen blankets as a wrapper, and here's a letter to testify so from the Secretary of the Whithorn Women's War Service. The bed covers, so beautifully knitted by Standard 2, are being sent to keep somebody warm on a minesweeper, and I'm sure on these cold nights the knitters will like to think that they have put their best work into comforting these brave men who are doing so much for us all. The Whithorn Women's War Service thanks the children most heartily. Yours sincerely, A.A.D. Honorary Secretary. Then there came a mumps epidemic, causing 100 children to be absent. The pumping system in the outside toilets broke down, and that meant a constant trek across that playground to the higher grade, and there was clang, clang, clang all day long. 1940 came, and with it the big snow, 29th of January. Fewer than 10 pupils were present out of the whole school. School was closed for a week. Roads were blocked. At the nearby military camp, airplanes had to drop bread for the troops there. By the 5th of February, only 50% of pupils were present. The staff out with the town couldn't get through. This continued for another week. Members of staff and janitor were called up for military service. In 41 and 42, at the beginning of these years, with similar conditions, interrupted work because of road conditions. Indeed, in 42, the school was closed. Needlework material was in short supply. We were depending on closing coupons, and in some classes, this subject had to be abandoned altogether. By 42, we had a visitation from the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, the Right Reverend Dr. Taylor, buckled and tuned and all that. The older children were addressed by him. The younger children viewed him. He was accompanied by his wife and the Reverend Harry Law. Because of lack of coal, there were often closures during the war years. For physical education, we divided our time between the church halls and the town hall. In 1945, the infant classes had to revert to double shifts because of lack of staff. This year, Mrs. Cook and I had to share in taking a higher grade art due to Miss Morton being ill. This meant 9 o'clock in the morning for us instead of 9:30. In 1946, we welcomed the return of Mr. Johns from the forces. Here is a resume of this year. First of all, open fires still heated the primary classrooms. The playground was repaired. School meals were now served in the woodwork room to 150 children. All the primary staff had to take part in this supervision, and how we liked it. During the war years, the magazine had been suspended, but this year it was now resumed. This year's preparation for a school concert in aid of town improvement funds given by the primary and secondary pupils was going ahead. Concerts under Mrs. Cook's direction for the war effort were of a very high standard. And that brings to mind a play that primary is a combined play. Primary 3, 4, and 5 did. It was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The coffin was made by the woodwork teacher and was covered by cellophane. And we were just at that crucial point when Snow White had died. And the dwarfs came in. They were dressed in the brownie uniforms. They were provided the uniforms and their caps on. And they were all lamenting and crying out, "She's dead, dead, dead." And Mother Nature took command of one, and there was rather a loud report. So those in the area heard this, and they took to laughing, and they're saying all the time, "She's dead, she's dead." And the audience wondered, there all this laughing going on. It was a queer situation. At Christmas time, a party for 314 pupils was provided by the Town Improvements Committee. In the spring of 1947, the inclemency of the weather involved 131 pupils being absent. 47 May, along came the festival time again, in which my class was very successful, gaining first place in their section, and in 48 too, and in 50 we were third. Dr. Wiseman was the adjudicator and votations 47-48. In 47, Mr. Brown retired, and Mr. Johns acted as interim headmaster for a few months until Mr. John Smith arrived. This year, Provost Arnott visited the school and gave talks touching on local government. The chain of office was the subject for a talk, as also the town's motto was commented on, Resurgam. In 1948 came, and we now had a musical advisor, Mr. Vanderhoff. That's when he did come. For many occasions he didn't. His car was continually breaking down. Here is a quote from Mr. Smith. He was agreeably surprised to learn of the existence of the school magazine. He had not heard of a magazine in connection with any of the Wilkinshire schools. Here are some excerpts as from my class, Primary 1. A baby lion is a little cube. A good game to play on windy days is draft. The new look is something you've never seen before. The shoes were mended by a cobra. The Wigton masters were Margaret McLaughlin and Margaret Lockwood. And regarding the learning of the commandments, this was a new version I got one morning. Thank goodness it wasn't on one of the days when the ministers were there examining. So I asked, what's the 9th commandment? And then if you can say the 9th commandment to me. Where it says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbour. And this child stood up and said, thou shalt not bear false witness. Still on the subject of magazines. This year, 1949, there was a fear that the magazine would not be published because of a fire at the printing works of the Galway Gazette. This school was the only one in the county publishing its magazine, and it was determined that every avenue would be explored to have the magazine kept alive. It had set such a standard for others to follow. Listen to this contribution by an 11-year-old. The School of 2049. The children sit at desks with the sun streaming through unbreakable glass windows. No noise from the world outside penetrates the classrooms, for they are so made that no sound can enter. On each desk is a row of switches, and opposite each such names as reader, history, geography, etc. Press one and your book appears miraculously in front of you. This is one of the fortunate schools, as some others are just recovering from the Third World War, way back in the 1950s. An occasional rocket goes by at a slow rate of 3,500 miles per hour on its way to the moon or Mars. The classroom has a television set, and by it the children see what is happening in China or Burma, or they may even watch explorers on the moon. Geography is taught in this way, and history is retold by gramophone records bearing speeches of Mr. Attlee or Mr. Truman, both long since dead. Nature study is more difficult, as the children must possess a knowledge of the birds and flowers on Mars. There are about 12 children in each class, as half the world's population was blown to smithereens in the Third World War, or at the time Britain became a republic. Some classes are listening to the biography of Premier Stalin, or the story of the fall of Russia. A teacher can teach till he is 100-year-old and thinks nothing of it. The children use writing, counting, and spelling machines, and to prevent them from losing the use of arms, legs, and head, they get extra periods of drill. This magazine contained a tribute to Mr. Johns of the wonderful concerts, wonderful concerts and the festival. The concert ran for 3 nights. The efforts of the pupils were greatly appreciated by the capacity audiences. As a result, the proceeds were drafted towards the purchase of beautiful costumes, which now enhance the stage of the new town hall. They cost over £100. And every time I see them, I remember these concerts, and every time I see them, I wish that there was a proper Thelma to correspond. Not that old beauty. Looks the patchy. Heating troubles came with 1950. Engine trouble with Mr. Vanderhorst. Election day, on the 23rd of February, was a grand holiday from the daily grind. Then there were the usual festivals, dancing now. Musicals came along with their accompanying successes. At the end of the session was the usual concert under the leadership of Mr. Vanderhorst. For the first time, the newly composed Whithorn song, school song. Did you know we had a school song? Oh, well. I'll just read you the first verse. I'm not going to sing it. Come, let us sing of Whithorn, a song so gay and free, St. Ninian's sons and daughters in spirit proud are we, from Glasserton to Sorby, Kirkinnick to the Isle. In field and farm we own thy charm and praise thy winning smile. For a higher grade in primary and infants too and all, the roof will raise in song of praise for pride of Galloway. So that's the school song, that's the Whithorn school song. How shall I describe these concerts? This concert, the self-assurance of the infants, the sweet voices of the juniors, the rollicking sea shanties, the French action songs, the verbs of the dancers, all contributed to a memorable evening. Then, term examinations were reduced from 3 per year to 2, and no objections were lodged by the pupils or teachers. Morning milk started at third of a pint consumed daily. The roll was now in the primary 210, in the secondary 91, total 301. In 51 sound films in evidence this session. They were interesting. In particular, one dealt with epidemic disease. Since the school was recovering from a widespread flu that depleted classes and staff, this was well appreciated. 1953 was the coronation year and saw the school closed for 1st, 2nd and 3rd June. School sports were held. This year, 2 huts of the Horsa variety provided 4 classrooms in all. These are still in operation down the hill, near the burn, and on wet days you have to ford the streams to get there. The plans were approved for a new hall which would be available for assembly, for physical education, a dining centre. So down came all the old sheds in the playground. No longer was there shelter from the rain. All the noise now comes inside. In 1955, we had the pleasure of welcoming the Duke, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in our ancient and royal borough. A very prominent place was accorded all the school children. They were well in the front. What a gay town it was. Even commented on by the Duke of Edinburgh. This was the first royal visit since the days of Mary Queen of Scots. In 57, the new dining centre was opened for the first time. It has a wonderful reputation, producing such wonderful menus. I'm sure the envy of the county. Today, the dining room is equipped to cook for 300, 260 for Whithorn pupils, 32 for the Isle of Whithorn, 8 meals on wheels, plus the teaching staff and the dining staff. Much water has run under the bridge since the halfpenny plate of soup in the 1920s. I am now drawing near to the present time, and as you are well acquainted with present-day happenings, I'm merely mentioning headings. 59, the festivals were now wholly transferred to Stranraer, and now go under the name of the Wigtonshire Musical Festival. Primaries 3, 4 and 5 competed and were successful in gaining a first-class certificate. Mr. Annan was the headmaster, 59. And this year, Master retiral Miss Gilmer, after 55 years. Then, in Mr. Annan's time, there was a ceremony of prefects in the gym. In 1960, we had our first Burns concert program. It was held in the gymnasium. The whole school took part in this. Also those connected with the Whithorn Burns Club attended. We had a school concert for 2 nights in 1960 in the town hall. In May, we were at Stranraer, the festival. We were served in the musical section. On the 5th of May, we gained first place in the verse-speaking play. For the closing concert, we made the journey to Stranraer to act it over again, and what a gay night we had that night. Alas, one of the members not present now. Before the end of the session, and for some time past, we have a call of the police ever proclaiming the road safety campaign. This they demonstrate by means of film. In 1962, we saw TV installed as another aid to education. Mr. Annan now is leaving, and one day Mr. Campbell came along. He was introduced by Mr. Annan. We were busy at a music lesson that day, and I can remember saying to him, "Oh, if I'd known you were coming, we would have had the Campbells are coming prepared." Well, foreign travel was introduced that year as broadening the outlook, and after a short period, Mr. Campbell went and Mr. McKechnie arrived. Now, further progress is the order of the day, and under Mr. McKechnie's headship, the new techniques of present-day requirements have come to happy fruition. This year also sees the secondary pupils parley-doing again, accompanied by staff. A happy holiday to everyone. And now, in lighter vein, sayings in my own class. I remember at the beginning of the year, one pupil telling me that she was going to make a New Year revolution. A new name for an escalator is an alligator. I was once asked, did I live long ago? And another occasion, a composition lessons in progress, and we weren't getting on very well, so I said, well, they couldn't visualize what I wanted them to talk to me about. I said, all right, describe me then. So they said, you got blue eyes, your hair is grey, you wear spectacles, you are very old. Oh, I said, how do you make that out? Well, you taught my daddy. Well, from the examination books, what did Columbus hope to discover on his voyage? And the answer came, the most beautiful woman in the world. So even at primary three stage, they're looking after the ladies. Description of what Robinson Crusoe saw from the tree. The boat was full of sandwiches. And one day there came an excuse about a girl not to take physical education. Please excuse Mary from taking her kilt off as she has a cold in her head. The provost's cloak was trimmed with vermin. The provost's cloak was trimmed with vermin. The person who shot the apple off his son's head was Wool-E-Tail. The climber of Everest was Mr. Hill. And so on. Teachers fulfill many roles. Oh, I think I'm out of my station just now, but I'll carry on. Teachers fulfill many roles. There have to be a bit of Sherlock Holmes, finding out, reprimanding, admonishing, praising when praise is due, rendering first aid, and good manners, which brings me to my annual sermon. What is it, Marianne? What is it? M. You tell them. Hear that? Manners maketh man. Continually being preached. The marked difference from the old days when boys would salute the teacher and the girls would bow. Now it is, hello. Then there is the bad language question to be contended with. It seems to be the order of the day more so than in my early days. Well, perhaps I've gone into details too much, but as a roundup concerning changes, methods are continually changing. This is the era of change. Different systems of reading being practiced, method of approach in arithmetic, or should I say mathematics. Group methods are practiced at all stages, finding out for themselves with all aids from books and dictionaries, no spoon feeding. Arithmetic lessons, all sorts of activity going on. You'll not find them sitting in their desks, busy plodding away there, measuring things, measuring lengths and widths, even themselves. Weighing going on, weighing objects. Project work is being allied to history, geography, nature study, handwork. Don't you wish you could have it all over again under these conditions? Mind you, though, I still go in for the drill in the old-fashioned table yet. Radio came and TV too at a later stage. It has been described as a rival system of education. Children and parents too must be taught to use it profitably and to associate it with learning as well as with entertainment. Now I've given you a resume of the years gone by. What shall I say? To be candid, I must say that on the whole I've enjoyed the work, and I know I shall miss the children and the routine. Teaching presents a daily challenge despite the frustrations and fatigue it brings. It's varied, it's intellectual, social, and emotional to every participant. It's work worth doing. It's good to work with human material, satisfying to be engaged in work which offers scope for every talent you possess. It's particularly pleasing to be largely responsible for your own conditions of work, since classroom life is what the teacher makes it. Finally, here at home and in the outside world are many of Whithorn's pupils, too numerous for me to mention, who've done credit to themselves and their school. In business, in farming circles, in all the services, and in the professions. The record of the past has been of a high standard. May the future still bear that high purpose in mind. Carry on, Whithorn JS School. Live up to your town's motto, preserve it. My dear.
it's the last time we'll hear her so often. I had it scribbled down here to ask you to show your appreciation in the usual manner, but it was so spontaneous that I'm sure that Miss Henderson will be gratified by the response her address has met her. And that now there comes a part of the evening for which I have already been very severely rebuked at the Venal corner outside Davy Doughty's at the monument. every possible occasion when she can nail me getting into the car. The matter of the presentation with which the community has so keenly wished to be associated. And now, Miss Henderson, to mark the occasion of your retirement and after such valiant and distinguished services to your profession, and particularly to Whithorn School and the many pupils who have benefited from your teaching, and also to record the gratitude of the community for your talents so freely given to so many organizations for which you have done so. It's my very great pleasure on behalf of the association to ask two pupils, one a present pupil and one of your first pupils, to make the presentation of a camera. I believe one of your present pupils, and along with the camera,
very much, Marianne. Thank you.
Along with the camera go a projector and a screen, and one of your first pupils, equally handsome, I think. And with it, of course, for the best wishes of everybody in Whithorn for a long and happy retirement. And in so doing, I would like to tell you that Whithorn people possibly have a wee bit of Aberdonian in them, in that to say an Aberdonian always gives his girlfriend lipstick for Christmas, because in that way he's sure of getting most of it back.
What a demonstration!